Hi guys, I've said it before and it's becoming more and more clear that those who sold Brexit were never really going to be impacted by it. They either had European passports which allowed them to fly to the EU if they needed to, or they were rich enough to weather any financial downturn. Here communist turned conservative Claire Fox can't defend the failures associated with leaving the EU, so instead attacks the civil service for either not being on board or standing in the way of the British people. Have a listen.
Do you have a feeling that leaving the EU was the sin against the Grail as far as the civil service establishment is concerned?
It's not even just my feeling, is it? I mean, we were actually told by somebody from the House of Lords who was very senior in the Foreign Office that he went in the morning after the announcement of the decision to leave and reassured everybody that although everyone was devastated and that he himself was devastated, that, you know, we'd get through, and there were people crying. He actually admitted that. So
why did she find this funny? What's so funny about this? Why is she laughing? I was recently told a story, happened this week, where an individual with cystic fibrosis is struggling to get access to the medicine they need. If they can't access this medicine, they risk to die. Now, maybe Claire Fox finds this funny. I don't. So the civil servants who were probably crying or deeply concerned were worried, what do we do now? We've told people, either our families, friends, not to vote for Brexit because of the consequences it would have on Britain. Most medicine, 90% I believe of medicines in Britain are imported. So of course there were people concerned about what will happen now if we leave the European Union. We've actually voted for this. The politicians, of course, lied. The politicians, of course, will be protected. They have their European passports, or they have enough money to be weathering this storm. But ordinary people will not. What about businesses, small businesses that rely on importing or exporting from the EU? What happens there?
I mean, I think we can safely say that that indicated a partial response to Brexit. Everybody that's commented and worked at the heart of government and tried to implement Brexit has noted that there's been barriers put up by the civil service. So I think that was definitely...
They're not barriers, it's reality. We've been down this road before. The Home Office, for example, under Priti Patel and Suella Braverman saying, let's just turn back the boats. And the civil service say, we can't do that under international law. It's easy for you to stand up in Parliament and say, let's do X. But reality is the opposite of that. And when Brexiteers in the British government were saying, let's do X, the civil service would actually have to implement that X. And on many occasions, they said, we can't do that. That's not putting up a barrier. That's reality.
Something in that. But partial civil service is, you can be lazy, just blame the blob for everything. I did get irritated when government ministers, when they were Conservative, would do that. But I also had a lot of sympathy, having had now some experience in Parliament, of feeling as though there's a very politicised civil service that's existed. I'm particularly interested in issues around sex and gender, for example, around the equity, diversity and inclusion agenda. And
because equity and equality is a terrible thing. Because previous governments said what we need to do is implement equality legislation. And the civil service have to implement that legislation on a number of levels. Now, you don't like that legislation, but that doesn't mean that the civil service should just ignore it because Claire Fox has a problem with it.
And they're quite openly political, partial, one-sided organising mechanisms behind the side.
They're not a democracy. It's a civil service we're talking about. They're given rules, they're given legislation to implement, they're told what to do, and if that legislation is sound, then they will implement it. If it's crazy, like during the years of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss, then of course they're going to struggle to implement it because it's acting against reality.
The scenes that actually get in the way of fair advice to ministers in instances. We've had civil servants tell us that as whistleblowers. We've got a special group who've had to organise secretly of civil servants themselves complaining they're bullied if they've got the wrong position on whether it's critical race theory or sex and gender. So I think there is a case to answer here, and now we have Keir Starmer, and I do think this is extraordinary, who is the administration has appointed people in what can only be seen as a march through the institutions, muddling up political appointments. Even somebody who is going to be judging propriety and standards is actually being questioned. And so I think that is going to leave a nasty taste in the mouths of anybody observing it. And the two Keir Starmer impression of there's one rule for them and one rule for us, and the civil service being deployed by a government on their side, I find nerve-wracking and worrying politically.
Was she living under a rock during the last 14 years when the Tories were engaged in all sorts of corruption and cronyism, where friends of the party were given massive amounts of money, either through contracts or just because they liked them? This person was completely silent during all of that, and now all of a sudden she says, I have a problem with Keir Starmer treating the public in one way and acting differently. This is somebody who was defending Boris Johnson during Partygate. It's just a bit of cake, leave him alone, he did his best. Okay. But back to the Brexit thing, this is once again another situation where you have somebody who's financially protected from the impacts of Brexit and probably has a European passport. So if she needs to leave the UK for some reason, she doesn't have to queue like, the peasants. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.